We're now going to move on to look at one of the major Agile frameworks, Scrum. If you want more detail on Scrum than I provide, it is available online in the Scrum Guide, which is the definitive guide to Scrum. However, I will be providing you with everything you need to know in order to pass the PRINCE2 Agile examination. So let's start with the definition of Scrum. A framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. Now, the key phrases I'd like to draw your attention to in that definition are, first of all, complex adaptive problems. So, complex problems. If a problem's simple, you don't need a framework to solve it. Adaptive problems indicates that they're changing. The problems are changing to the environment, to the business context. And Scrum is very much focused on delivering products in a changing environment. Scrum is also defined as a framework for developing and sustaining complex products. And the sustaining is important. So once the project has ended and we pass the product into business as usual, Scrum can continue to be used for maintenance of that product or service. It's a collection of roles, events, artifacts and rules, which we'll be covering on the next few slides. It was created in 1995 by Schwaber and Sutherland. It's a way to assess the efficacy of your practices so that you can improve. And note, it's efficacy, not efficiency. So efficiency is doing something without waste. Efficacy is having the desired effect, being effective. The first and probably most important thing to understand about Scrum is Scrum Theory. It's founded on empirical process control theory. That is, it's based on evidence. It's not based on gut feel. It's not based on intuition. It's based on empirical evidence. It covers three areas: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And the two key concepts that support transparency are a common language and shared definition of done. So if we're developing a product, we all need to recognise when that product is done. So what level of documentation, testing, etc. are required in order for the product to be done, to be complete. Inspection and adaptation are supported by sprint planning, the daily scrum, the sprint review of completed products, of products that are done, and the sprint retrospective. And we'll cover those on later slides, but it's important when we're covering those to recognise that they are supporting inspection and adaptation rather than the other way around. So the three key areas are transparency, inspection and adaptation. And we inspect to create empirical evidence and we adapt based on that empirical evidence. And transparency has a number of benefits, but one of them is improved communication. So we're not hiding anything. What the development team is doing is transparent to people outside of the development team, so they can be assured that the development team is developing and acting as the business requires it to. The Scrum team is self-organising, cross-functional, flexible, creative, productive. There are only 3 roles on the Scrum team: the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum Master. The product owner is effectively the representative of the business. On a PRINCE2 Agile project, this could be the PRINCE2 project manager, as the PRINCE2 project manager interfaces with the stakeholders, with the project board, the executive, the primary user, the primary supplier. Or it could be someone else designated to be the product owner for a specific product within the project. But the product owner represents the business on the Scrum team. So they'll be there to inform the Scrum team of priorities for development. So in the Scrum backlog, if there are 10 items on the Scrum backlog, we've got a fixed time box, sprint. The Scrum team can't necessarily deliver the whole backlog in the sprint. The products need prioritising. It's the role of the product owner to prioritise those items for the Scrum team. The development team has only one role: developer. But it is cross-functional, so there may be a number of skills represented on the development team, a number of job titles within the organisation represented on the Scrum team. But on the Scrum team, every role, every development team role is a developer. It's self-organising, so the development team could choose to have a development team leader to interface with the product owner, or they can choose, or the development team may choose not to have a leader and just interact with the product owner as they see fit, as required, effectively to spread responsibilities for leader around the team. The Scrum Master is what's termed as a servant leader. Now that can be quite a controversial title because it's got servant in it, but effectively what it means is the Scrum Master is there to help and advise the Scrum team on the use of Scrum. So they're a Scrum specialist. It's highly unlikely that that role would be filled by the PRINCE2 project manager. It's more likely that the person filling that role would sit in a centre of excellence in a group of Scrum Masters, people with specific Scrum knowledge and experience within the organisation, and then be allocated to one or more projects to help them with their use of Scrum. So the Scrum Master is focused on the use of Scrum, not particularly on what you're using Scrum to deliver. We now come on to Scrum Events, and there are 5 Scrum events that are prescribed within Scrum: sprint planning, the sprint, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and a sprint retrospective. And they're shown in this diagram on the slide here. And you can see it starts on the left-hand side with the product owner who creates the product backlog. That is simply a list of all the products we want the development team to deliver. And that's a prioritised list. We then move on to sprint planning, where the Scrum team come together to select the sprint backlog, which is the list of prioritised products the development team are going to try to deliver in the next sprint, the next time box period of development time. Once that's agreed, we move into the sprint itself. And the sprint is simply a defined period of time during which the development team develop the products listed on the sprint backlog to the required quality for delivery to the end user. During the sprint, we have a daily Scrum, and that's shown at the top of the diagram. The daily Scrum is where the development team come together every day for a stand-up meeting to discuss how the current sprint is going and how they can help each other in delivering the products as effectively and efficiently as possible. And as you can see on the diagram, the sprints generally last 2 to 4 weeks. And at the end of the sprint, we have effectively 2 reviews. We have the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. The sprint review is reviewing the products, the project products, that have been created by the development team during the sprint. The sprint retrospective is reviewing the processes used during the sprint. So the sprint review reviews the products we've created for quality, efficacy, and so on. Do they meet requirements? The sprint retrospective reviews the processes we've used to create those products. Can we improve upon those? And remember, it's the Scrum team that is performing the reviews, and the reviews are based on empirical evidence. And as is common with PRINCE2 in terms of lessons learned, the sprint review and the sprint retrospective, it's important that we adapt, that we learn lessons, and we only learn lessons if we implement changes based on those lessons learned. It's no use just documenting them and then carrying on as we had before. We now move on to talk about Scrum Artifacts. There are 3 Scrum Artifacts: the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. Now, I've mentioned 2 of those already. The product backlog is effectively, in PRINCE2 terms, the product breakdown structure and all the product descriptions. It's a list of all the products that we need to develop in order to deliver the project product. The sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog that we are attempting to deliver, that the development team are attempting to deliver in the current sprint period. The increment is the list of products in the product backlog that are complete. So again, in PRINCE2 terms, you might ask for a product status account to show all the products that are complete, and that would be the increment. Okay, so we'll finish Scrum with a brief summary. So going back to the main diagram, you can see it starts on the left with the product backlog. That's all the products that we need to deliver in order to deliver the project product. From the product backlog, the development team select at a sprint planning meeting the list of products they're going to try to deliver during the current sprint, and that forms the sprint backlog. And the sprint will last typically for 2 to 4 weeks. During the sprint, the development team will have a daily scrum at which they will discuss how the current sprint's going and how they can improve their performance and ensure they deliver the sprint backlog. At the end of the sprint, the completed products are delivered to the product owner and they form the increment. Throughout the process, the Scrum Master aids the development team with the application of Scrum, the use of Scrum. And throughout the sprint, the product owner is there to provide guidance on business priorities within the product list, within the sprint backlog. The product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment are transparent. That is, they're available for inspection by anyone within the organisation, so everyone can see how the development is progressing. At the end of the sprint, we have 2 reviews. The sprint review, where we review the products produced during the sprint, that is the increment. And the sprint retrospective, where we review the use of processes and procedures during the sprint to see if we can improve the next sprint.